And we are on the air. Hey, everybody, welcome to the very first episode of Safest Family on the Block, where we talk to experts on matters of family safety so you don't have to do the research your own self. I thought it very appropriate to open everything up by talking to my good friend, mentor, and personal hero, Tom Callos, who can best be described as one of the foremost raconteurs and ne'er-do-wells of the martial arts industry. I want to start by telling two stories on Tom. And the first is Tom's been doing advice and consulting for martial arts studio owners for years and years, if not decades and decades. And the first advertisement I saw from Tom that really got my attention was a picture of a bowl of cherries that said, "Eating well is self-defense." And that really hit a chord with me about how among all of the kicking and punching and knifing and shooting that people think about with self-defense, that's not what's going to save you in modern 20th century world. What is going to save you is protecting yourself from heart disease, keeping your cardio up, knowing how to fall down without getting hurt. And Tom, if you want to talk a bit about that yourself, because that's kind of been your message for the 10 years I've been working with you, and probably far before that as well.
Yeah, well, my premise, and it's not an original premise, but it's not the dominant paradigm, is that self-defense, if we're going to be the leaders of what is self-defense in the world, if martial arts is going to be relevant to self-defense, then we have to really look at what we're doing. And typically, the way martial arts schools were approaching self-defense was from a hand-to-hand combat stance, hand-to-hand or, immediate threat and arm engagement of an actual conflict. And that's certainly a piece of the pie of what self-defense is. But if you look at the top 10 killers of men, women, and children in the nation, in the world, kicking, punching, and choking is not on the list. There are many other things, diabetes and heart disease and just suicide and a myriad of other things that cause suffering and death. But we weren't addressing them in the martial arts community, and to a degree we've improved, but we have a lot of room for improvement. So my stance and my niche has been, in regards to self-defense specifically, has been to try to wake up instructors and say, you're not teaching self-defense if you don't teach kids how to deal with fire. How many kids die from smoke inhalation, fire issues, not having an escape route? How about drowning? How about getting backed over by cars? In the years that I've taught, and I've taught thousands of people, I've had classes of 30 or 40 kids. And in the case of diabetes, for example, 1 in 3 children are expected to be affected by diabetes in the next decade, type mostly preventable. And so you can just go down the ranks, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And I've had students die from drowning and smoke inhalation and car accidents and suicide and cancer. And had I known in advance that any of those kids were going to be victims of those issues, there might have been something I could do. And I think self-defense is recognizing a potentially dangerous situation and doing something about it in advance. And that's our job in the martial arts community. I try to influence instructors by saying, your job isn't to carry the weapons. It's not to enforce the laws. You don't incarcerate the criminals. Your job is prevention. You know what could happen. And as good instructors of self-defense, you go out prior to it happening, because everybody will be on it once it happens. But prior to it happening, be it rape or assault or discrimination or drowning, you can go before and say, there's statistics say this is going to happen, so let's learn how to avoid it.
Yeah, very good. That's exactly what drew me to your program initially, and why I wanted to talk to you first for this new project, because you always have this rarer viewpoint of self-defense and safety. I think parents, because of the way the media is portrayed it, and because although it's statistically, honestly, a rounding error how often happens, the idea of a stranger abduction is maybe the most terrifying thing parents think about. But compared to so many of these other things, the idea of a home invasion is something some parents worry about, that some people arm themselves to prevent, but again, is so rare in comparison to getting in a car accident while you're texting your wife whether she wants green grapes or red grapes on the way home.
My daughter had a fender bender in Marin yesterday. pushing the button for she was going to the doctor's and was trying to get a navigation, and boom, she hit a car in front. And I know you're a parent, and I am too. We worry about everything. It just, like worry of the day, you know, like, oh, it's this. And the news, I worry that she'll become a Trump supporter, you know, and I worry about all sorts of things that, you know, could cause great harm and suffering and pain. But yeah, home invasions and physical violence are certainly some of those. But statistically, you know, I don't think it's warranted. I think it should be a part of the training that people get, like algebra. You may never need it or use it, but it's good to know the basics, you know. But there's a lot of other things that we can address. And I think it's a huge opportunity for our profession to step up the game and start learning how, in small bite-sized increments, kind of the way we teach martial arts, to start ringing the bell of awareness so that people go out and are mindful about what they eat, about how they live, about who they interact with, and about what they do on a day-to-day basis. Because like the frog in the frying pan theory, you know, that I heard the director of La La Land recount yesterday, he said, you know, it's an old Zig Ziglar thing that who knows where Ziglar got it from. Put a frog in a pan of hot water, jumps out, put it in lukewarm water, turn up the heat a little bit, and it changes so gradually that the theory is that it just cooks, you know. And self-defense is like that. The things that can cause us the most suffering sometimes aren't those immediate things that we recognize are dangerous. It's diet and exercise or lack thereof. It's acceptance of mediocrity and other things that kind of just cook slowly, and before you know it, you're dead, you know. So I hope that's pertinent to this conversation.
I think so. I think there's a lot of that. I mean, remember that first newborn where we were so careful and so paranoid and so, you know, you'd worry about breaking their toes, putting on their socks, all these little things, but then, you know, but exhausting that you take your eye off the ball a little bit. I think that's very common for a lot of people. And I think one of the things that causes that is lack of knowledge of what's a realistic fear and what's something that's 1 in 100 billion chance that's really honestly not going to happen. And you can really take care of that fear by just kind of ticking off the box and being aware for the 2 things that'll tell you it's coming.
Well, I think our job is like this. I have been describing it to people, and maybe if you're watching this and you're not a martial artist, you'll recognize the value of this idea, is that our job, since it's prevention, is not to make people hyper vigilant about and scared. You know, I don't see people walking around, you know, worried about things and scared. But our job is to, every couple of weeks, to come up to the people we teach, the people in our community, and tap them on the shoulder, and they turn and look, and you go, hey, be careful, be mindful, you know, prevention is better than, you know, therapy. And that's it. It's the ringing of the bell. And I just watched that movie La La Land, which I mentioned, and, you know, it was touching and poignant and beautifully crafted. And it just reminded me of things that I don't normally think about. And I think that self-defense should be like that. It shouldn't be something you worry about all day long and night, but every so often someone should ring the bell. You should see or watch something and go, that's right, you know, that's important. And you lock your door, or you look at what you're eating at that meal, and you make a practice of keeping yourself and your family safe in a way that doesn't warp your sanity.
Yeah. I don't remember where I read it or heard it. Might have been from you, might have been from Soke McNeil, might have been something I picked up out of a book somewhere, but the phrase preparation is the antidote to worry has always been one of my favorites. The being aware of the thing, taking 1 or 2 small steps so that you'll be ready if it happens, and just taking those small acts helps to kind of settle that enormous pit of fear that is half of what parenting appears to be.
Many of us have survived it. Yeah, I think that my job is coming to fruition. I'm doing something that I really wanted to do in your taking in you, that my ideas are manifest in you, and taking on a project that addresses self-defense and safety. And part of my platform as a teacher has been to say, okay, you have these basics now, and you've done all this training. What are you going to do with it? What's the difference between where we're at and what we need? And could you help fill that gap a little bit? And I motivated at certain times more than 1,000 people at a time in my schools to train 3-4 times a week. Well, if I could be a catalyst to help 1,000 instructors do small projects that helped to raise the awareness, to help to raise the standards. And I think Safest Family on the Block isn't just an interview or a book. It's an ongoing dialogue with the community. And it sounds like a program that, wouldn't it be great if a martial arts school had something that everybody needed, kind of sort of like 911. Everybody knew it, you know how to dial it, you know what the results will be. And if we could get every kid to take enough preparatory, do enough preparatory self-defense instruction so that they won't be able to swim in the Olympics, but if they get dumped out of the canoe, they're going to be able to dog paddle to shore and not drown,
Exactly. So to that topic, what are a few of the things that you see parents in general, and especially martial arts parents, either under-preparing for, under-educating themselves about, or over-preparing for and worrying too much about despite the statistical realities of that threat?
That wasn't exactly the question you said you were going to ask me. It was expanded. But when you asked me, what should every parent know, or is there something, what would I think about a basic provision? I think this idea of expecting the best, preparing for the worst, that every family should have some kind of pre-discussed and maybe even rehearsed emergency escape route from their home should there be any calamity. Like, get out if you see smoke, take these precautions, don't go back in for your Rubik's Cube or whatever. And that an escape route is a very easy thing to work on. And I was in San Francisco the other day, and I was driving by a house, and all the house was dark except like the 4th story in a little room up there. And I thought, how would they get out? That's like a fire trap. You have these ladders that roll down outside of the house. There are things you can do. Just think about it. Anything you do to prevent is 1,000 times better than anything you'll say after the fact. Like, oh, I should have done this or I could have done that. So escape route safety plan for emergencies, be it a fire or something else. And I had a student who died of smoke inhalation when I was teaching in Reno in the 90s or 80s. And I had a dream about a year later, and I was in a fire in this dream. And I lived in Reno, so neon's a big part of that. So yeah. I imagined in my dream that there were red arrows, and I was following the red arrows outside of the house. And when I woke up, I took some notes, and I developed this little card system where I just put red arrows on cards, and then I would go into the dojo, and I'd set up a mat, and I'd say, okay, kids, this is your bed. Now, I want you, if there were a fire, you'd roll out of this, you'd crawl down because the smoke rises, the heat rises. You'd touch the door, you'd yell fire, you'd follow the red arrows out of the house, and you'd skedaddle to the safe place that you predetermined with your parents, and you would wait there, or you would make sure that you knocked on a neighbor's door, whatever the predetermined plans are. And then I started training kids to do that, and I made a race card so that our instructors that were helping me could roll out of bed, do all that they were supposed to do, and say, okay, that took 45 seconds. Now, Johnny, you try to beat it. And it was a very emotionally charged way to have fun with the kids, but also teach them a lesson. And then because I could photocopy the cards, or make postcards, I could hand a little set to every child and they could go home and play the game with their parents and things like that are easy for instructors to implement in their classroom, and they're perfectly relevant to self-defense. And to justify the energy and time, you'd only have to save one child's life. Yeah. It would all be worth it. And we have in that program, one of my students years ago in San Francisco had been doing this program with local youth. And sometime later, he got a call from a mom and said, we had a fire in the house. You went, took us kids through this. We got out exactly as we had planned. And so we kind of attribute the fact that we're all still together partially to your instruction. And that made all the effort worthwhile.
Yeah, it's amazing to hear these kinds of things. I remember becoming very aware of that escape route thing because the house I live in here in America, it's porous. It's one story, broad, 3 sliding glass doors to the back, big windows. When we were in Malaysia in 2014, we were on the 10th floor of a building with barred windows and 1 door.
Yeah.
In a building with what can be best described as a casual approach to fire safety. And it did. It really underscored the importance of exactly that, having an escape route and knowing how.
So, if you're watching this and you're a parent, boom, you've got it right there. Just do that one thing. And there's so many other things we can do, but boy, thinking about that and making it easier to get out from multiple exits, in the house, could really make a difference, I think. But go ahead. You had another question.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, so that's what you kind of hope everybody would do and know. What's one thing you wish you'd known 20 years ago that you know now about family safety?
I think diet is everything right now is diet. Because if you watch the news, if you stay current, it's just there's such an abundance of suffering caused because of the chemicals we consume. And also tracing diet back. Where does that food come from? How far has it traveled? What were the conditions it was made under? Is there exploitation taking place? Does it make sense? And there's just so much work. I wish I had been, and I've always kind of been into diet because one of my first jobs when I was a kid was in a health food store. Then I cooked in a health food restaurant called The Good Earth. Yeah. And so I was around it, but still, I think, if I had been more aware, I would have taught better lessons to kids. I think that's the one thing that I would like to go back and change again is to be, because I see diet not only as what I consume, but the cost of that consumption and the method of production and where it comes from. And, now we live in a society where a good portion of the people don't know how to cultivate their own food or to have the means to do it. And it's not that hard to do. And it's pretty smart, but there's something about what industrial food production that is linked to our health in general, and so that's kind of where my focus is for self-defense now, and things that I'm working on now that I wish I had been working on a long time before.
That makes sense. It's good. It's interesting that you bring up the context of the food, not just what it does to your body, but what it does to the world we live in. Because when we're talking about self-defense against violence, many of those larger things that loom in our minds in the last 15, 20 years are directly attributable to socioeconomic unfairness and exploitation of vulnerable cultures. And our awareness of that and the context of how our food is made can be a long-term form of self-defense against that, I think.
Yeah, I have a friend, her name's Julia Butterfly Hill. She's a famous environmental activist. She stood up in a tree for a couple of years to stop an old growth redwood from being cut down. And John F. Kennedy Jr., when he was still alive and was running George Magazine, said she's one of the top 10 most important, influential environmental activists in the world. She made a point one time. She held up a plastic bottle and said, "I'm going to throw this away." Where is away? And same thing with the Buddhist Zen master. I'm a fan of Thich Nhat Hanh. He makes does a lot of talks about connectivity, the connection between the cloud and the raindrop and what it does. He just draws this line so that you see, oh, right, I live in a world where I'm kind of disconnected from the consequences of my actions, be it conspicuous consumption or the elimination of waste or, the use of resources. But when you're really mindful, and sometimes there's nothing you can do about it. Our culture is of a certain way, but to be really mindful is to look at the trail prior to and afterwards, and not to just consume mindlessly, because our consumption has a cost attached to it. And some costs we can absorb and justify, and others, if you really know, like anybody who's a vegetarian, as a result of watching commercial meat production, because it's brutal and ugly, and everything from the labor to the way the animals are treated to the cleanliness or lack thereof. I mean, it's shocking, and it forces some people to say, I didn't connect that to the steak I'm eating, but now I do, and so it changes their behavior. I think there's some of that behavior changing that connectivity creates when you realize, I didn't realize this was hurting so many people, so I can do without,
Yeah.
Live
so
simply.
You're showing a little bit here. Huh?
What'd you say?
I said our inner hippies are showing a little bit here.
Yeah.
But it's good to have that out there too. So my third big question for everybody is that if there was a book or a podcast or a video or a talk that a parent has time to see one of these, experience one of these this year, which one would you recommend?
I like an old book called Strong on Defense, Stanford Strong. I saw him speaking on, it might have been an infomercial, but he did this. He was a retired police officer from San Diego, and he started talking to groups of parents and then play acting with kids scenarios. And it was just really common sense stuff that wasn't being taught in martial arts schools. And there's some really valuable takeaways from that book. But like, for example, he said that crime scene 2 is always worse than crime scene 1, which means that wherever you're being assaulted or whatever the crime is, you never let anybody take you anywhere, because statistically in police work, wherever you're taken, the crime scene there is going to be a lot worse than the first one. So that kind of dictates your actions in the first situation. That's where you fight for your life, not by acquiescing or going with someone to the next location. It's time to fight now, which I felt was something everybody should know, especially because statistics warranted it. But I think I want to remind the viewing audience that,
and especially given how much in fictional media and even in some news cases, you see the protagonist acquiesce and go to the crime scene 2 because it's narratively convenient. It's the model we see again and again and again.
I just felt like it gave me instructions that said, if something bad happens, that's the time to fight for your life, not by submitting, but by that's the end. We draw the line in the sand right there. And I think that might be good for a lot of, as a basic instruction, something you can remember. Because after that, I heard that, something clicked and I understood without a lot of discussion, if something bad happened, that I was going to have to remember that, that was going to dictate my action. But I wanted to remind the viewing audience that diet is having a good diet and using it to cultivate health and vitality isn't a meal. It's not a book. It's not a video. It's a practice. And there's no single book or single instructional video or anything that it really cements your safety. Safety and self-defense is something, it's an ongoing dialogue. It's not a discussion that you heard. It's a revisiting, like love, like parenting, like diet, like the elimination of waste. I went to the bathroom last year, so I'm good. It's something you maintain and keep doing, and to make these things a daily practice is probably the best advice. That if you can ring the bell every day and say, and be thankful for the things you can be thankful for, avoid the things that might cause you harm. That's pretty much the ultimate form of self-defense, methinks.
Outstanding. And that's actually was going to be my next question about if you have a safety practice that you do daily. And that sounds like exactly it. Mindfulness.
I wrote mindfulness and door locking, For many years, my family owned a lock and safe company. We had lock, safe, and alarm. And so I went on a lot of calls as a teenager and a 20-something repairing burglaries and, and helping people to secure their homes after they'd been violated, And a lot of people just had a key under the mat still, and the doors were unlocked and windows were open and unprotected. And It wasn't forced entry. It was often just, that old habit of ours of trusting and little things like locking your doors and doing that before can keep you from being a victim, because I found that most burglars that I had contact with through their actions were looking for the easiest possible. If they had to fight to get in and it was difficult, there were so many others that were easy to get in. They usually gravitated towards that, especially when all other things were even. Like, I guess if you were hosting the Queen's Jewels, you might be more of a target. But most of us, they were looking for quick turnaround objects of wealth that they could fund their habits with.
Yeah. So the unlocked door is always going to be more attractive than the locked door.
The Unlocked Door sounds like a novel, good novel, a short story title. Yeah,
Might be. I think there was a porno by that name at some point too. Almost certainly.
Okay.
All right. And so last one. What's the question you wish somebody asked you more often on tape? And what's the answer to it?
You told me you were going to ask me that, and it was difficult. It's difficult to. Because your question was, what question didn't I ask? But I think that the question that I'm addressing in my own head is, what is mastery? That because I've been doing martial arts for so long that a lot of people say, oh, Master Tom, I'm saying, well, what is mastery? What is mastery? And so it's about being mindful. It's about being connected. It's about being coming from a place of compassion. Versus a place of where you're an adversary or you're protecting or you feel the need to attack or that to right something that's wrong. I think compassion and so people ask me, well, what is our mission and our goal? What's our job? And I think I'd like to hear more people ask me that as a martial arts teacher, so that I could ring the bell of reminding them that our job is prevention and connection to our community and compassion. And I really can't think, the Dalai Lama said, my religion is kindness. Kindness that's kind of the base core thing. So, but I like the fact that you've asked me these questions. I'm honored to be a part of your podcast series, and I urge you to take what you learn from these interviews and create programs that our peers can disseminate to young people, because children especially defend themselves with their heads. I guess we all do. It's knowledge, not kicking and punching and choking and blocking. If you understand why something's dangerous to you or others, then you're more likely to avoid it. But going out without any knowledge of it and after the fact going, I wish someone had told me. Let's get martial arts schools, because there are millions of martial arts students in the world. Let's use that as a tool with which to help people be happier and safer and more compassionate.
It'd be great if that happened. And thank you for your work for decades now to move that closer to a reality.
Yeah, well, I'm trying.
It's always 2 steps forward, but 1 step back. But that's still 1 step forward in total. So a little bit more every day.
Well,
one foot in front of the other until the job's done.
Thank you for being a part of the village that helps make our little niche passion, more meaningful and maybe more effective.
Well, I've appreciated the invitation and the occasional kick in the butt.
You're welcome.
Thank you so much, Tom. And thank you, everybody, for watching. And you look for us next week. Take care, everybody. Bye-bye.